Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with my Dark Elf unit tier list for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires campaigns. When you're playing a Dark Elf campaign, you should be aware of two things. One, that you are playing a highly aggressive race that benefits immensely from fighting a lot of wars, picking fights, and they have the tools for it. They have a good variety of very early game units that they can get, especially with Black Arcs. So you want to get Black Arcs as quickly as possible, and you want to use them for recruitment. Two, the only foes they are forced to fight, essentially, in a campaign, due to the way the diplomacy works for them, are the High Elves. So when you're looking at how you're going to be building up your armies in the long term, the focus you're going to have there, you are going to benefit far more from building an army that's effective against High Elves than anything else. So that means you got to deal with elven archers, you got to deal long-term with dragons if you take your time, you got to deal with Sisters of Avalorn. So you have to deal with the kind of army compositions the High Elves build. Because everything else is a choice, essentially, in your campaign. Minus some campaign victory conditions, but a lot of the time it's a choice. Who do I fight? And usually your early game enemies, the ones you may have to fight for a short campaign victory condition, will not stand up to the massive swarms of early game units that are fairly good. So with that in mind, let's start with Dread Spears. I'm going to put Dread Spears in B tier. Not a bad unit. This is the thing people may misunderstand about B tier. B tier is not a bad tier. Every unit that's in B tier and even C tier, some of them, are units that you want to use in a campaign. They're just not exceptional. That's what A tier and S tier are for. Like really good units with A tier that you may use throughout the course of your campaign. Dread Spears are very useful early on, like 4 of them for flank protection, that anti-large benefit, that shielded benefit, that front line that works so well for High Elves. You have it. More damage focus rather than survivability, but still an effective unit that can hold a line for your range units or hold your flanks, dependent on what else you're recruiting. But yeah, an effective unit, you can recruit them from any settlement. The only downside is, like, late game, as you progress through the campaign, they just kind of fall off. Whereas with Spearmen and Archers, you can, as the High Elves, you can use them throughout the course of your campaign with no problems. And there's actual economic reasons for it. Whereas with Dread Spears, you will want to replace them because there's better units, especially when we were thinking about auto-resolve. Then we have Bleak Swords. Bleak Swords, I'm going to say, is an F tier unit. So when we look at shielded early game infantry, or early game infantry in general, a sword and shield unit that's basically the Dark Elf equivalent of swordsmen for the Empire, sure, they're better, but basically, Bleak Swords are never worth recruiting in a Dark Elf campaign. If you want damage dealing capability, like if you want infantry that's good at damage dealing compared to the more survival aspect of Dread Spears, you got choices. If you want a damage dealing infantry in general, you got choices. That basically boils down to Black Arcs and Black Arc Corsairs. We'll get into those guys a bit later on, but essentially, even if we didn't have the ability of getting Black Arc Corsairs quickly in a campaign, I'd still argue it's not really worth recruiting these guys. They're not great line holders. They're not good flank protectors. They don't scale up. They don't do damage. So why in the world would you recruit them? And that's just where I stand on Bleak Swords. In fact, even the ones you might start with in some campaigns, you just kind of want to get rid of as quickly as possible. Then we have Dark Shards, regular Dark Shards. So with regular Dark Shards, I'm going to put them in C tier. They're a good unit. Don't get me wrong on this one. They're a good unit. They do a good amount of range damage. That's the thing about Dark Shards. They're an effective crossbow unit. In fact, they, if not for Akshinas and, Celestial Dragon crossbowmen, they might be one of the best crossbow unit in the game. It's just that you have a better version of the unit available fairly quickly because Dark Elves have instant construction. So a lot of the times you might have an argument with a lower tier unit because, building slots or construction times, but you don't have that argument in a Dark Elf campaign. You get access to tier 2 very freaking quickly in every campaign. Malice Darkblade, sure, you have to build your settlements, but you got that significant growth benefit you can get, and everyone else basically, tier 2 barracks are right there. You can get those very, very quickly. So this is where we talk about regular, we talk about Dark Shards with shields. It's just a better unit. And bear in mind, you may be dealing with quite a few ranged opponents, so that ranged survivability that Dark Shards with shields have makes them just a better unit. They're a good crossbow unit, really solid in any kind of battle you might bring them, and can be used throughout the course of your campaign as it is your principal ranged infantry unit that you want to use. It's cost effective, it's good in terms of range capability. They don't have any melee capability, sure, like Shades, but usually, and they don't have the best armor, so compared to, say, Jade Warrior, Crossbowmen, and all that, they won't have quite the same survivability, but sheesh, that range damage is kind of ridiculous when you think of the various things that Dark Elves have going for them during the course of their campaigns. So yeah, definitely an S tier unit. Then we have Doomfire Warlocks. I'm going to put these guys in F tier. They're a glass cannon unit. They can do a fair amount of damage. Mind you, all Dark Elven units, minus Dread Spears, Bleak Swords, all that. But all Dark Elven units except that can do a fair amount of damage. These guys can do more. They have mobility, they have speed, but they're just kind of not worth using. You're going to be dealing with opponents where survivability is important. Either survivability through armor or survivability through shields. Ideally, you'd have both, but that's kind of the thing. You don't have both. And Doomfire Warlocks are just kind of one of the worst units you could ever recruit in a Dark Elven campaign. I mean, even ignoring the High Elf aspect. Think of recruiting these guys against Skaven, against Cafe, against demons and all that. Yeah, they're technically good against demons, but they also get wiped out. Like, they can do the damage, and then they die very damn quickly. You do have good casualty replenishment available in a Dark Elven campaign, but still not worth putting these guys in an army almost ever. Then we have Witch Elves. So I'm gonna say Witch Elves. They're a trashy fighter unit. They're good at dealing a decent amount of damage, especially if you're playing Hellebron. They can be effective in terms of their damage dealing capability, but you're lacking in terms of survivability. They're effectively the demon version. They're effectively demonettes, but for Dark Elves. And the problem with that is they're not as good as demonettes. Demonettes, when you think of a unit that's a glass cannon unit, what do you want from it? One, you want them to close the gap, and two, you want them to do a lot of damage in melee once they do close that gap. And Witch Elves just kind of don't have that. I mean, Doomfire Warlocks could have that, but they're too squishy, actually, to really utilize it effectively. Being on foot as a fast-moving unit is useful. I mean, if you want these guys, if you want them for the sake of dealing with, say, early game enemy infantry, sure. But it's fairly situational. Like, with Witch Elves, you just recruit them if you literally don't care to recruit anything else. Same with regular Dark Shards. Then we have Sisters of Slaughter. These ones are basically same as Witch Elves, just kind of the same unit, just more effective. I'm just going to say they're a B tier unit. You may use them if you want to, though I actually, on second thought, I think I'm going to put them in C tier. And put regular Witch Elves in D tier. I think that's a more accurate representation of their actual combat usefulness. Like, you may want to use them in some situations, both of them, especially as Hellebron. Again, the specific campaign benefits she gets for these units can be useful, but a lot of the times, you're going to be better with Dark Shards and Dread Spears, to be honest, early game, and later on, you're better off with some other things. Then we have our Chariot unit. So we have Scourge Runners, we have Cold One Chariots. They're okay. I'm going to say that they're okay as Chariots and just leave it there. what is the value of a chariot? It can be to harass an enemy unit, it can be to get stuck in melee. They're not the best chariots in the game for that role, but they're decent. I think B tier is kind of where you're at if you want that speed on the battlefield, and realistically, when we're looking at the design of Dark Elven campaigns, yes, even with all the growth and all the instant construction benefits, these are kind of the only quote-unquote a cav unit or fast-moving unit that you really may want to recruit in a campaign to harass the enemy, to close the gap, to take a portion of the enemy army and have them pursue you. That's what these chariots can do. That's what the effective use of a chariot. Then we have Medusae. I'm going to put Medusae in... Like, it's a good question. Like, as an effective unit, would I say that its combat effectiveness is good? Sure. Are they accessible enough? Sure. Are they worth recruiting? Kind of. Like, yes, you have a ranged single entity, but all the same, just... I've never been too fond of Medusae. Like, a single entity range just kind of leaves you wanting something more. The damage can be there. It's just there's some issues in getting it there with their projectiles. They're a bit unwieldy on the battlefield. Same with the Shrine. I'm also going to put the Shrine version on B tier. You know, tier requirements and all that kind of stuff. But it's just a better unit, ultimately, compared to regular Medusae, if you want that. The Shrine itself can have its own complications in terms of pathfinding and such. But, yeah, they're not the best single entities in the game. They're not, you know, wow factor. But they can get the job done. Then we have... then we have Blackheart Corsairs and Blackheart Corsairs with handbows. Both of them S tier units from my perspective. So here's the benefit for both of them. Like, you lose one weapon if you go with handbows, but you get the range capability and skirmisher capability, and they can dish a decent amount of damage. Both of them are very easy to recruit in Dark Elven campaigns because you can recruit them the moment you get a Black Arc, or the moment you get a barracks on a Black Arc, rather, which Black Arc should start with. Wildly enough, Lokier no longer does so, but I imagine that's because he has more Black Arcs than everyone else combined, if he gets enough ports, and you will get a good amount of ports. Naval supremacy is a thing for Dark Elves, just worth pointing out. The thing about Black Arc Corsairs is they're pretty good in terms of dealing with essentially anything the early game may throw against them. And they're heavily armored, so they're going to do well in auto-resolve. They're going to do well in a combat situation. Honestly, I kind of wish we had a spear version of these guys, because that would just invalidate the Red Spears completely. But we don't, so we have to deal with what we're given. Then we have Karganeth's Executioners. A heavy, two-handed, armor-piercing weapon damage infantry unit. Yeah, they go in D tier. Dark Elven heavy infantry just isn't as effective as many other races have. You might think that these guys can compete with, for instance, Chosen or Elite Cast Warriors. In reality, they'll be eaten for lunch. They just don't have the same kind of durability that many heavy infantry of other races have. And if you're dealing with range factions, and you will, they're not really effective in that role. Then we have Blackguard of Nagrand. Blackguard is C tier. The only reason you want to use them, ever, in a campaign, is not for infantry on infantry fights. Dark Elf heavy infantry is just not good enough to justify bringing them on. And if you're dealing with heavy infantry, just get line holders in your campaign. Like, I would rather get a lot of Blackheart Corsairs to hold enemy off and get Dark Shards to hit them from range, or, you know, rely on monsters, rely on magic, rely on many different things as opposed to relying on infantry. I mean, technically it looks like a good unit. Practically, just doesn't work. I mean, if they were a tier lower, yeah, I would put them both in A tier, but because then they're effectively comparable to Tsarguard from that perspective. But they're not. Like, they're kind of on that level of trying to compete with Chaos Warriors with, say, Grey Weapons or Halberds, and they're a tier higher, which makes it frustrating to actually recruit them in a campaign. The way things work in a campaign, in any campaign, is that the units that you will most often use when it matters in a campaign are units you can recruit tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 4 is where things slow down. Like, Dark Elves may get a lot of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 units relatively quickly because of their insane growth and insane construction speed, or instant construction speed for slaves, but even they take their time to get tier 4. And realistically, you're just going to be better off focusing on getting other buildings in your campaign and getting more armies of units that are individually cheaper, like lower upkeep. It's the combination of cost, tier requirement, stats, etc. that makes both these units not necessarily appealing. All right, so we have Cold One Knights. Cold One Knights, when I'm looking at it as a unit, I'm going to say that they probably fit in either A tier or B tier. They're a good enough heavy cavalry unit. The biggest drawback of them is their tier requirement. It's kind of a shame, really, because they're not horrible. It's just, yeah, tier requirements suck. They're not demigryphs. Let's put it like this. They're the same tier as demigryphs. They are not freaking demigryphs. And then you consider some of the cavalry units other races can get even faster or on the same tier. Like, you're looking at cast freaking Knights or Lances. Do you want to know who dominates that particular fight? Yeah, it ain't the Cold Ones. But then we have Dread Knights. Cold One Dread Knights. Your elite cavalry unit. Honestly, as an elite cavalry unit, these guys are freaking scary. They're the only cavalry unit that is genuinely worth recruiting in a Dark Elven campaign. They are annoying to get. Yes. Undeniably so. But there are some really good high-end units that you do want to recruit. These guys are durable, have a good amount of damage dealing capability, have a good amount of survivability. They're just good flat out as a cav unit that you want to use. And as I said, it's the only cavalry unit that you kind of want to go out of your way to recruit in the Dark Elf campaign. Even facing High Elves, because they'll resist a lot of range damage. Don't be surprised. What won't resist a lot of range damage are Dark Riders. And I'm going to just put both of them, shielded and unshielded version, in F tier. I don't know what's this fanciful nature of Dark Elves who have so many damn units that are fast moving, or they have 3 units of cavalry that are fast movers with damage potential. Well, at least Doomfire Warlocks can do damage. Dark Riders don't even have the damage potential. The only reason you might recruit them is to try and harass enemy range units and artillery, but even then, just kind of not worth it, really, from a campaign perspective. We do have repeater crossbows, and these guys I'm going to put in C tier. So, repeater crossbow Dark Riders, they have that speed, but they're actually useful to use with that speed. They're not going to be so useful against High Elves. Keep in mind, they'll be annihilated by a ranged line. They'll be outranged by the High Elf range line as well. But if you're looking to nudge the enemy into attacking your prepared positions, or you're looking to harass a portion of the enemy army, then yes, we should definitely look at Dark Riders with repeater crossbows. They're pretty good as far as a ranged cavalry unit goes. You won't be using them against your principal foe, and you might benefit using Chariots more. Chariots are more useful, but still, they do have that purpose. Then we have Harpies, a useless unit. The only reason I'm not putting them in F tier, let me just say it like this, as clear as day, they are definitely an F tier unit in terms of combat capability. The sole reason you may ever recruit them is they're cheap, they're available, and they also can give you that flying capability, which you actually lack. Like, you have flying units as Dark Elves, though not many, and tier requirements of combat effectiveness. Harpies are just good if you want to harass the enemy backline, but outside of that, not really all that much. Then we have Reaper Bolt Throwers. Yeah, so Reaper Bolt Throwers, I'm going to put them in B tier. You do want to get them for the sake of siege capability, but that's about it. Same thing as with regular, the High Elven Bolt Throwers or the Eagle Claws, is that the problem you have with their design is they're a sustained damage type unit. So you need to have a prolonged engagement to really make the value. They're not going to do damage in a single hit that's really meaningful. It's more about doing damage over time. That's good in sieges. You do want to recruit them for the sake of sieges, especially given how many freaking towers High Elven settlements have. They don't have dead zones as many races do. So you do want them, or you'll be obliterated by High Elven towers. That's kind of the thing to point out about Wolf 1. In fact, I'm going to say that because they're so damn important for dealing with Wolf 1 settlements, that it's actually an A-tier unit, partly because it's required. Like, High Elven and Dark Elven settlements, or certain races, have towers at tier 3 that are going to do a significant amount of damage to your army. And so you need to neutralize those towers before you attack. And because there's a lot of overlapping fields of fire in many High Elven settlements, yeah, you do want artillery. It's kind of a prerequisite. Normally, you can argue, well, you can use allied recruitment. That's kind of a bit of a problem, actually, with Dark Elves. Because, yeah, Lokir has Cafe, that's no problem. But you kind of have to go out of your way to ally Bretonnia and the Empire, so that leaves you Grombrindal, which is an issue if you're playing anyone else other than Malekith. Yes, there's Malachi if you're Malus Darkblade, but that's a different discussion. And for him personally, he doesn't give a shit about Siege because he is a one-man Doomstack, so just a unique situation. Besides, you may not care to go in Norska to get that relationship with Malachi. So yeah, Reaper Bolt Thrower, A-tier unit. Then we have Shades. Okay, so this is where I'm going to get a lot of flack. So regular Shades, the baseline version is a C-tier unit. Pretty much no reason to recruit them, because what's the genuine benefit of Shades? It's that hybrid role and that skirmisher infantry, ranged infantry role that they have. Well, regular Shades are just not going to be as damn good as the other two variants. So that brings us to the dual-wield version, which I would say is a B-tier unit. And it's the kind of unit that you might want to recruit for that role. The thing is, though, here's my perspective. A lot of people are big fans of Shades. I'm not. Because Dark Shards are cheaper. They're easier to recruit. The building you recruit them increases your hero capacity. And they have better survivability in a stand-up range fight against High Elves. Yes, that mobility and that Shades have in their stealth capability makes them useful in certain matchups, but not your principal one. And that's something worth pointing out. But you do have Shades with Grey Weapons. And Shades with Grey Weapons, I'm going to say, are an A-tier unit. It's just because they're the most effective melee unit. And kind of hilarious when you think about it. You know, if freaking Blackguard or Hargonef Executioners were on the same tier as Shades with Grey Weapons, they would be A tier, but they're not. Shades with Grey Weapons are your heavy freaking infantry, or as close to it. Like, yes, they're obviously, much of their damage is going to come range before the enemies close in the gap, but once they close in the gap, they can be pretty effective against many heavy infantry at the same tier. So that's the reason you want to recruit them in a campaign. If you're going to go with Shades whatsoever. Then we have Charybdis. So Charybdis is monster killer. Like, really? Since, Blackguard are not worth it. Like, if you want to deal with enemy monsters, Charybdis are really the way to go with that. That's their main value proposition. They're good against enemy monsters. That's the role they have in a campaign. Hydras are general purpose units. Charybdises are monster hunters. So that's the reason you want to recruit them if you're going to recruit them whatsoever. It's not bad to go with Charybdises and Hydras in an army, actually, like once you have a lot of money. Hydras, solid enough monster unit on foot. Not good against other enemy monsters, but pretty good against everything else, like entire enemy armies. They'll survive range damage, they'll survive melee damage. It's kind of hard to take down a Hydra, believe it or not. It's more nimble in some ways on foot than a dragon. Then we have Manticores. I'm going to put them in D tier, though with a caveat. If you could actually control this damn unit, it would be good. But you can't control it. A lot of time you'll just lose control, it will go on a rampage, it will do its thing. Whereas, really, if you had full control of this unit, I would put them in freaking S tier. Because they're a flying unit that can go after enemy artillery and all that. But the problem is, once you take damage, and they will take a lot of damage in both auto-resolve and manual battles, and then you lose control, you might even start a battle with losing control of these guys. They're just not really all that much freaking value in recruiting them, unless you're willing to make those trade-offs. Sometimes you might, if you really want a unit to just dive bomb the enemy, but we have Black Dragons for that. So I'm not going to put Black Dragons in S tier. Combat effectiveness, of course, is S tier. Undeniably so. Capability of flying is obviously S tier, but it's just that tier requirement. I will hesitate to put any unit in S tier just because of combat capability alone. Simply because you need units that you're actually going to recruit when it matters. And again, Warhammer free campaigns are very front-ended, and so it's important to have units that are available. This is one of the benefits of Moon Dragons for High Elves, for instance. Like, it's not just that they're a good flying unit and they give you that mobility, it's also they're more available. They're not tier 5 exclusive. And that's the problem of Black Dragons. Sure, there are some tier 5 units that are amazing. You know, Arcane Phoenix, you can think about that, for instance. But it takes something truly exceptional. And by the way, I don't think Thunderbarges qualify for an S tier. In fact, I've rated Thunderbarges much lower. But anyway, this is my Dark Elf unit tier list. I am sure that on this list, one of the big point of disagreements is going to be with Shades. But I'm just going to make this point very clearly. Yes, Shades are a general purpose unit that is good against most opponents, especially the Grey Weapon version. But again, your campaign objectives are focused on dealing with Ulthuan. They are not so effective against Ulthuan, whereas Dark Shards are. And Blackheart Corsairs, you might ask about those against High Elves. Well, they got the durability. They got the armor. They don't have the shields. That would be freaking awesome. But they have the durability at the very least, and that's an important factor. That's, by the way, one of the reasons Blackheart Corsairs are so freaking useful. You can actually auto-resolve a vast array of foes, which is a Blackheart Corsair army. And Dark Shards don't suffer, range units don't suffer from the same penalty in terms of auto-resolve. Hybrid units do tend to do well in auto-resolve, but they are not, Shades are not going to do as well. The trade-off is not worth it from my view. That's all I have to say. Costin signing out.